So thinking about psilocybin being special in that regard, I feel like pretty unapologetically confident to say that that is likely connected. Like I also remain agnostic, or I like to call it virtuously ambivalent about it. But to me, it seems like that's probably because the intelligence of the psilocybin mushroom, which is an extension of the intelligence of the planet, as the mushroom is a part of the evolution of the planet and is, intricately and intricately woven into the ecosystem of the planet as a species in and of itself, as an organism in and of itself, and
Yeah.
that is the intelligence of the mushroom, and particularly with psilocybin, to bring that to human consciousness, or bring that to the consciousness of higher primates that consume it, while also
Mm.
recognizing that I don't know that for sure. So I'll hang on that sort of softly but unapologetically confident to say, like, yeah, that's, to me, that's probably, I feel like that's probably what it is.
So do you, might I ask you, James, like, is that your take on, I'm sure you thought, why do these fungi produce psilocybin? Like, what's the agenda there? What's the evolutionary agenda underlying that? And is your take that essentially, like, it's because part of the scientific hypothesis put forward is it's some kind of repellent or pest. It's designed to keep pests at bay. We know that psilocybin evolved relatively recently in evolutionary time, between 10 and 20 million years ago. It spread through horizontal gene transfer between these different fairly unrelated genera of fungi. So clearly it conferred some kind of evolutionary benefit because
Mm-hmm.
it spread quite widely. And like, sure, like it may have started off as some kind of repellent or insecticide or something like that, but there's not any direct evidence to support that. And there's actually evidence on the contrary. Like, they did some research at Kew Gardens on psilocybe cyanescens mushrooms, which are quite potent psilocybin rich materials, and they introduced fungus gnats, which are common like fungal consumers, onto the fungal matter. And basically these fungus gnat larvae, the maggots kind of ate this psilocybin rich fungal flesh and matured to flies without any sign of any ill effect whatsoever. Which kind of, and those fungus gnats are like, they're important, you know, global consumers of fungal matter, and they seem to be completely untouched as far as we could see by the presence of psilocybin, by the presence of high amounts of psilocybin. So my particular take now is psilocybin is more likely acting as an attractant than a repellent. It's calling in things like maybe us or other species to consume that fungal matter, and then inadvertently, through doing so, disseminate and spread the spores. I think that's a more likely thing. In similar contexts, we've recently found that some mushrooms bioluminesce; they glow in the dark. We don't, why their mycelium does is a whole other weird question, but we know that some of the mushrooms that glow in the dark in the forest at night, they're attracting in insects to their light, and then like the moths and the insects that come to the light, they then help disseminate the spores. So fungi are already recruiting animals, and that weird cicada,
Oh
so
yeah, yeah.
the fungus, the entomopathogenic fungus that attacks the cicada. And yeah, like, I mean, that was found, much to the scientists' surprise doing it. It's like, it's psilocybin is the mind control agent that this fungus is using to hypersexualize these cicadas. And like, most of the time when these fungi attack insects, they kill them, then they fruit. Whereas this one bucks the trend. It's like, no, it turns them into zombies. It hypersexualizes them to the point where the males will imitate other females to call in males. So they grab the males and mate, and they keep mating until their body disintegrates, revealing this plug that releases these spores, like the salt sakers of death. The scientists call. And I just find that fascinating, that such a simple organism can wrest control over a life form much more complex, relatively speaking, and bend it to its whims. And I find that, like, we've got that example there of psilocybin being wielded by that particular fungal species. So I think it should call into question as to why the fungi are producing it. In other species as well. I think it's an interesting thing.
I think so too. I'm glad that you started with this question for me and ended up with an answer for yourself. But I mean, the question you proposed to me, it's like I don't pretend to know why the Earth would evolve that. I mean, like there's these investigations that you're talking about, like a quality of thinking or of inquiry that could bring about an understanding, such as the idea of it being an insect repellent. Obviously, not really a substantial argument at this point. Um,
No.
but but for me, it's like, I mean, at that point, I'm kind of going on what the mushrooms have told me, which is not really a great scientific reference point. Um, but even just thinking about it, it's like, okay, so I don't I don't know how much consciousness or self-awareness is present in the organism of the planet, or how much forethought that organism might have to the unintended consequences of its evolution, or how much sort of like strategic adaptation it's doing with like a particular observation of what's already happening on the planet, so as to sort of curb something. Yeah, okay, viruses emerge, things take over the forest adapts, blah, blah, blah. It's like how much of that is sort of like a conscious choosing, or how intelligent is that process? I don't know these types of things.
Yeah.
So what role did psilocybin end up, like, why was it brought about? I don't know. I mean, maybe in my mind, as you're talking about attracting things
Mm.
to the mushroom, the forests are being destroyed by humans, and when people eat psilocybin mushrooms, they love the forest more, which means they're less likely to want to destroy it. So
Mm.
then possibly the mushrooms are trying to attract people to protect the places in which not just the mushrooms survive, but the entire forest survives, because the
Yeah.
mushrooms as a species, or fungus as a species, in the forest are more concerned with the health of the entire forest than in its own explicit reproduction, because the entire forest is necessary for the mushrooms to grow, its
Yes.
life and its death. Um,
I've similar claims made about ayahuasca actually. Like it's kind of looking out for itself, but by doing so, the kind of Amazonian biosphere as well. I find it really fascinating. Just I gave a talk at Breaking Convention a few years ago on this. That yeah, obviously when we eat when we consume psychedelics and psilocybin mushrooms, it tends to make us more connected to nature and the environment, and in doing so, fosters more concern for it. But another interesting thing relating to what you're saying is a lot of these mushrooms and some other psychedelic plants, you tend to get them in degraded or human altered habitats. You
mm,
know, at least like liberty capped, like our indigenous psilocybe semilanceata, like our mushrooms, endemic psilocybin mushrooms here. They are mushrooms of pasture land, of human created grazing land. You know, and then they're quite a prominent species as well that are quite sort of obvious, like the wood loving psilocybe mushrooms. Like we've got like feral psilocybe cyanescens mushrooms here now in the UK growing wild on wood chip beds, and some of the other species even in Mexico. They tend, like some of them you'll find deep in the forest and in the wilderness areas, but they you also find them in areas of disturbance and around human habitation. I remember like one of the some potent species I think was like actually growing up through Maria Sabina or someone's floor in a house. Like you can, yeah, you get a lot of these species living in or sort of thriving in areas of ecological disturbance, which kind of like feeds in sort of what you're saying. It's kind of if you kind of zoom out and have a bit more of an overview effect on the ecological systems on the biosphere, it's quite interesting.
yeah, even too, like zooming out. I mean, if there's an intelligent responsiveness, I believe there is. How the level of self consciousness I'm not proposing, but if there's an intelligent responsiveness to the planet that's adapting to what's happening, given how old the planet is, the time frame of its assessment is so different than the time frame of a human assessment. And who's to say that the whatever many millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years that went behind the sort of like first emergence of psilocybin to getting it to a point where it's an organism that grows in disturbed lands or human disturbed lands. It wasn't an intelligent design in preparation for. It seems like this is the trend. I should be on par with this trend, but again, I don't pretend to know.
Yeah.
It's just this is just wild conjecture and fun and
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.